Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Live with Rodney. And we're doing this one through our House Administration Committee. This is the committee in Congress, the House Admin Committee. It's the smallest committee in Congress, but as the lead Republican, we have jurisdiction over the nation's elections policy. And our Constitution clearly states that our elections should be controlled and held at the state and local level. And the federal government plays a role. We've invested billions of dollars just over the last couple of years in Help America Vote Act funding to help our local and state officials to address cybersecurity issues, election machine issues, and overall election issues. And I'm really proud today to be joined by Washington State's Secretary of State, Kim Wyman. Kim and I met because we have a great mutual friend in Dan Newhouse and others like Kathy McMorris Rogers, Jamie Herrera Butler. But Kim was one of our first witnesses in one of the first hearings that I got to be a part of as the ranking member of this committee. Kim, welcome to Live with Rodney.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, you know, we talk on a regular basis, and you talk with my team, and your team talks with them on a regular basis about how elections matter and the issues that you as a state election official and others that are secretaries of state, or in the case of Illinois, the State Board of Elections, the issues that you face. And just over the last year and a half, we've gone from trying to address cybersecurity issues, voter access issues, vote center issues, vote by mail issues. And really, that's the reason why I wanted to have you on, because explain to us your election system in the state of Washington.
Oh, sure. So in Washington State, we have 39 county election officials. They are predominantly the county auditors who are independently elected. And then in King County, where Seattle is, we have an election director who is also independently elected. And I serve as the state's chief election officer. So we have an interesting relationship, because I have the rulemaking authority. Once our legislature passes a law, the actual rules that go into effect on how you would actually conduct an election or implement a new voter registration change, that responsibility falls to my office. But beyond that, we work with our county election officials to train them. We do reviews of their operations, their policies and procedures on a regular basis. And then we have a really new partnership in the last year of our statewide voter registration database and election management system, which allows now our counties to be talking to each other in real time to implement same-day registration, which will be, this will be the first presidential election to do that, provide that service for our customers in a COVID-19 environment. And then my office also has a security operations center, thanks to the funding from Congress for election cybersecurity. So we brought that up about 2 years ago, and we provide support to our county officials on the election side as well.
Well, what got you interested in running for and now being, after being elected, Washington State's chief election officer?
Well, to be honest, I'm probably I would say I'm an election geek at heart. I started as a county election director in Thurston County, where Olympia, our state capital, is, and served in that role for about 9 years or so, and then became the county auditor and served in that role for 12. So at heart, I'm an election administrator, and almost 20 years of trying to build a good election system here in Washington really motivated me to run for statewide office to make sure that our state continued to have good, clean elections.
You know, we talked about numerous occasions, how do we make sure everybody gets a chance to vote and still allow the autonomy that our Constitution requires for state and local officials to run our elections? You know, we've had the conversation, and as we have with other colleagues of yours that are secretaries of state or other election officials, you know, and there's some different needs in different states. Explain the system that Washington State uses.
Certainly. So Western states are really, I would say, probably ahead of the country when it comes to absentee or vote by mail elections, and that kind of trend moves eastward pretty slowly. I think with COVID-19, it's moving rapidly, but you know, we've been a vote by mail state since 2011. We started to move to vote by mail back in 2005, following a very close and contentious governor's race. In fact, the closest in the country's history. After 2.7 million ballots were cast, 2 recounts and a court case, the winner won by 133 votes. And after that, we were a poll site election state at that time, and about 60% of our voters got an absentee ballot every election. So we were really conducting 2 elections simultaneously. And that's why we started to move in 2005 to completely vote by mail elections. It still took our state 6 years to completely convert. And I mentioned that because that's one of the challenges you're seeing across the country, is that these states are being faced with that same kind of spin up, going from polling place elections to completely vote by mail or complete absentee voting overnight. And I think that's the challenge that you're seeing in the primaries that are being conducted right now.
So really, vote by mail is not the same process as getting and requesting an absentee ballot, right?
That's correct. And it's a subtle difference, but I would really describe the difference between the two is that an absentee ballot requires the voter to take action to get one. So the voter by default is either a polling place voter or a vote center voter. And if they want to get an absentee ballot, they can choose to. And that varies by state. Some states, like ours was before we were vote by mail, had what we called permanent absentee voting, where you could get an absentee ballot every election. Some states you have to request them proactively every election. And in some states, you have to have an excuse. There has to be a reason why you need to vote an absentee ballot. And each state has its own reasons for doing that in its long political culture and history. And now they're rapidly having to check that paradigm.
Great. So you mentioned it took a while for Washington State to be able to implement the vote by mail process. What issues did you have with the process itself? Maybe in regards to concerns with the Postal Service.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and in fact, I forgot to close out my last answer, which dovetails into this one. The difference between absentee and vote by mail elections is in a vote by mail environment, everyone defaults to getting a ballot by mail. And if you need to go into a polling center or a vote center, to maybe get a replacement ballot or register or vote with an assisted device, those are the people who vote in person. So in Washington, a lot of challenges. I think the thing that gets lost a lot of times in the dialogue about absentee voting and vote by mail is that you are really widely increasing the access, which is a good thing. And certainly in a COVID-19 environment, it is a solution that I think most states are really looking at, trying to reduce the number of people that come into their courthouse or into their polling place or their vote center, because we want to keep our voters safe and we want to keep our workers safe. So with that said, how do you build in the compensating security measures so that you can really instill confidence in the harsh critics on either side? And I like to be very bipartisan when I talk about elections. So, certainly there's been a lot of tweets and a lot of commentary about vote by mail and absentee voting from the White House, and that there are claims that it's very fraudulent. And then on there are members of Congress who have said the other side that if you don't have universal vote by mail, that we're going to somehow suppress voters. And election officials across the country, I can assure you, we are all working very hard to ensure that people can vote safely and that everyone can exercise their constitutionally protected right. And so the ways that you do that is you build in compensating controls. First and foremost, in our state is we have, first of all, a voter ID requirement at the time of voter registration. So since 2006 in Washington State, voters have to provide either their Washington State driver's license, Washington State ID card, or the last 4 digits of their social security number. And what this does, and the vast majority of our applicants provide one of those 3, 98%. We do have a provision for alternative IDs for those who don't have it. But I mention that because the first level is we have a high confidence level that the people on our rolls are real people. I hear frequently, how do you know they're not dogs or they're false, registrations? Well, that's our first check. The second check is that every single return ballot has a signature that the voter signs. They're attesting to an oath that they're eligible. And that signature is compared to that original voter registration signature. And surprisingly, over our lifetimes, our signatures remain pretty consistent. They do change potentially in the beginning of your voting life and towards the end of your life, but in the middle, they stay consistent. And the people that check signatures are trained by Washington State Patrol, and they If they don't find a match, they notify the voter, which serves two purposes. One, gives the voter a second chance, but also is a security check. Because I guarantee you, Representative Davis, if you got a letter from your county election official that said your ballot had been returned and your signature didn't match and you hadn't voted yet, you'd be on the phone in a heartbeat to let them know it was a fraudulent ballot. So that's the first line of security. We have spent decades building in internal controls. I think in 2004, that election I mentioned, we had many problems at the polls and we had many problems with absentee ballots. The biggest one was we didn't have good internal controls. So trays of ballots were missed. They got set places and they didn't get counted and they were found. And then now all of a sudden you have to explain to the public why 400 ballots are going to be added to the count because election officials didn't do their job. So what's really important for the counties and local election officials that are doing this work right now is you have to have reconciliation measures. You have to count how many ballots you received back, and you have to be able to say down to every single last one whether or not it was counted and if it wasn't counted, why it was rejected. And all of those measures are designed to compare to the totals that come out of the machines that count the ballots. And ultimately, it's creating a very robust audit trail to be able to explain to a critic that you didn't suppress voters and that you didn't have voter fraud.
So, you had mentioned in some interviews before that states, may not be nearly as ready as other states to fully implement a vote by mail program before this November, before this presidential race. What metric do you think needs to be in place for states, and what do all the states look like when it comes to the possibility of being ready for a program that you just said took how many years to implement in Washington?
Decades, at least 5, closer probably to 20. Well, a number of things. I think the first real big challenge that we all face is, first of all, personnel. And it doesn't matter if you are a polling place state, if you are an in-person voting state, if you are a vote-by-mail state. Right now, our election workforce, and it is a robust workforce, is over 65, the vast majority of it. I'd say probably half to 2/3 of our workers are over 65. These are people that may not be able to come into work even if they want to, because they'd be at high risk. So we're going to have a huge recruitment effort, no matter what type of voting system we have, to try to backfill those positions. The second challenge is that do we have the printing capacity, not only for ballots, but for all of the envelopes that are going to need to be printed to send to voters and have them send the ballot back. And that sounds really rudimentary, and I'm sure people are right now thinking, well, there's plenty of printers, but it's a very specialized printing. The envelopes themselves are customized. You have to make sure you even have the stock of paper nationwide to do this and have the printing capacity. And these states need to work with their postal officials to make sure they meet all the regulations for those envelopes. So even if you could do all of that, the biggest challenge is we are all going to need to print our ballots and our envelopes basically at the same time. Especially, those of us who have later primaries like August, we're not going to know who's on the general ballot until mid to late August. And then you have a very short window to print all of those ballots and envelopes, insert them, address them, get them to voters, particularly our military overseas voters. So it's really a time-driven exercise on the front end to just meet all those requirements. And then on the back end, the ballots coming into those election offices, how are you going to deal with a 50 to 100% increase or 200, 500% increase in your volume? And those local election officials that are dealing with 2% of their ballots cast by mail now may find themselves suddenly counting 60%, 70, 80% of their ballots by mail. And do you have the high-speed sorters to count those ballots or to tabulate those ballots? Do you have sorters to deal with the envelopes? So it's all of the mechanics of it. And then finally, if that wasn't enough, and don't forget cybersecurity and all of this. The U.S. Postal Service is right now running out of money, from what I'm told, and that is going to be the backbone of delivering all of these ballots to voters and having them returned back to county and local election officials. So, Congress, we really need you to help, please. Just a little bit there.
Which is why we have you on. I want everybody that can see this broadcast to understand some of the concerns that our state election officials have. I know you've been very vocal with your counterparts in other states other secretaries of states and other election administration officials. What are they telling you? Because as you know, and as my viewers, our viewers right now know, your state is much different than our states when it comes to elections and the processes that are in place. So what are your colleagues telling you?
Well, we're all just heads down trying to make it work. And the people that I work with across the country at the local level and at the state level, we do this work because at a foundational level, we want to make sure our democracy continues long into the future, and that we're stewards of making sure that people's constitutionally protected right to vote is protected. And that's a foundation of every election official I have met. Now, we may have political differences, but at the end of the day, it's never lost on election officials that responsibility. So we're, right now, just calling and contacting each other and trying to solve the problem. So, I don't have enough time to print ballots. What are you doing in your state? And sharing a lot of information. I think one of the great unintended benefits from the money that we receive from Congress for election cybersecurity has really helped us communicate in a way we could not have done 4 years ago or even 2 years ago. As you know, Representative, elections was designated as critical infrastructure in 2016. And that has allowed election officials all the way from local, towns and cities and counties that do elections to state officials like me to be able to get the resources to really build out cybersecurity. And one of those parts is we built out communication systems to share when we get hacked, or if some event happens, to be able to share that in almost real time. And that has helped us share information about how to bring up absentee voting, how to move to vote by mail in a way we just didn't communicate even 2 years ago. So that part, I know members of Congress get beat up all the time because you don't give us enough money at the states, but I can say thank you for all of the resources that Congress provided in terms of money and all of the intelligence that we've received and the information we received from Department of Homeland Security and the FBI and so many of our federal partners that we're in a much stronger position for cybersecurity and, quite frankly, dealing with this pandemic than we would have been in 2016.
That's great to hear. Obviously, we don't want any nefarious actors, foreign actors or domestic actors to interfere with our elections. We want them to go off without a hitch. And I know if you're a Republican or a Democrat election official, 99.99% of all of you who run our elections just want to see election go fairly. They want to see it go off without a hitch. They don't want to see long lines. They don't want to see delayed election results. They don't want to see things happen that bring scrutiny to the election processes when the majority of what you're dealing with in every other precinct or every other election usually does go off with minor hitches, if any. So when we talk about trying to rush a vote by mail program nationwide that took you, say, minimum of 5 years, but upwards of a couple decades to implement in Washington state, we've heard some of the concerns, maybe delayed election results, any other problems that you're seeing right now with Washington state that you saw during that implementation process that we need to understand could be a part of this rush to put a nationwide standard in place for this election in November?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the big ones I'm concerned with is just the amount of processing time that local election officials are going to have to get through that incredibly big volume of ballots that they're going to receive by mail. I mean, even if they don't spin up vote by mail, even if they have requirements for absentee voting, quite honestly, you're going to see large increases. So my biggest fear is that, one, some states have laws that do not permit local election officials from processing those ballots before election day. So here in Washington State, before. So here, hang with me here. In Washington State, we mail out and make ballots available 20 days before election day. So our voters are actively voting in that early voting window 20 days before election day. Ballots start coming into county election offices, and I can tell you from many years of doing this, half of our ballots come in by the Friday before election day, which more importantly means half of the ballots come in election week. Washington State has a postmark requirement. So as long as your ballot is postmarked by election day or before, or in a drop box by 8 o'clock at night, it can be counted. So on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of election week, half of our ballots come into the election center. And election officials right now around the country are doing the math. If 70% of our ballots come in by mail, half of them are going to come in election week. They can run the numbers and they can look at the volume. If you don't start processing those ballots and getting them ready to put through the tabulation machine, and what I mean by that is checking the signature, removing the outer envelope that has the voter's name on it from the inner envelope that has no markings and doesn't, so you're giving that voter secrecy piece, taking that ballot out, and most importantly, inspecting the ballot. Because my 30 years of doing this work, voters are creative. And you know what? When they see Rodney Davis, they don't necessarily fill in the oval like they're supposed to. They might circle your name. And when they do that, if we run that ballot through the reader that way, you're going to not have a vote at all counted. No one will. But if we actually look at it and you look at that ballot, we can both agree that's a vote for Representative Davis. So my point is you have to pre-inspect those ballots, and you're going to have to duplicate them or make a copy that will be able to be run through the machine and counted accurately. That takes time. So all of those timing things, if they can't start that work until election day, it is going to really slow down election results reporting. Also, just the sheer volume. So really looking at how long of a certification window. And my biggest point of all of this is we are probably not going to know who the president-elect is, or quite frankly, most elected officials who are on the ballot this fall, until well after election day. And that's just the mechanics of the volume of ballots that we'll be dealing with. And so one of the things that I think election officials are going to start talking about with the media and with members of Congress, with elected officials in our legislatures, is that anticipation, because what we do not want to happen is for people to start saying, well, clearly they're just rigging the vote. Election officials are just marking more ballots. There's stuff in the ballot box. And you know what I can tell you, again, having done this a long time, we don't have time to create more ballots. We're just trying to get done with the ones that are voted in. But of course, in the heat of an election, you can't say that. I'm joking now, but the reality is we're going to have very delayed results. It's a fact, and we have to start anticipating that now. And part of this is transparency. We need to have opportunities for people to observe, have cameras in those facilities so people can watch 24/7 what's happening, and then inspire confidence. And that's what we have to do. One last thing I do want to put on this topic is I'm noticing that Raiders blanket in the background, and I don't have any Seahawks paraphernalia behind me, doggone it, is election officials really, regardless of your political stripes, consider ourselves a lot like the offensive line in football. See, if we do our job, you don't notice us. You notice a quarterback, and you notice a running back and the receiver. And that's kind of what we like to be, is we like to be the unsung heroes. And so our goal is to not be the lead story the day after the election. We want you talking about, the candidates and who's winning and losing, not the mechanics of the election. So I can say across the board, across the country, election officials really are just trying to do that job.
That is a great comparison. As a matter of fact, as I told you, I purposefully put my Raiders blanket up there to any Seahawks fans because of the memories of the Seahawks at one time beating the AFC West. So, but it is true. I mean, nobody knows who the election officials are unless there are problems. Mm-hmm. Nobody knows who an offensive lineman is unless there's quarterback sacks. And I thank you for bringing up the memories of so many years of Shell and Gene Upshaw just really demolishing the Seahawks. I appreciate that.
Well, our Lombardi Trophy gives us comfort, and you have Marshawn Lynch, so
he left.
It's all good. I know he did. Okay, I love Marshawn.
We have Josh Jacobs, and look, I just certainly hope we have football come this fall, and that would be a testament to the economy and America recovering. I do want to go back to one thing that you said. You mentioned that if a national vote-by-mail program is forced onto states that, we know right now we have 27 states that only have about 2 to 10% of their voters that use the absentee ballot process or their existing vote-by-mail process. So we know there is going to be an overabundance of ballots coming in at a late date and the infrastructure issues that you mentioned. But it seems like an easy solution would be, just allow election officials to tabulate ballots before election day. You think that could cause problems, or you think that's a solution?
Oh, no. And make no mistake, when I talk about ballot processing, I'm trying to choose my words very correctly. We don't tabulate any ballots before whenever the polls close, 8 o'clock in our state on election night.
Why wouldn't we just let them?
Pardon me?
Why wouldn't we just let states do that?
Because you have you've got to build in laws, and it does need to be a law that you cannot release anything kind of result, even to staff, quite honestly, that are processing those ballots. You cannot release any results because clearly that's the ultimate poll. Polls are nice, but elections are real, and so you can't show that candidate X is doing really good right now on Friday and publicly release that, because you obviously then are going to have people accusing you of all sorts of things. No, the election results cannot be known until the polls close, and then those results are released. I'm talking about just the physical processing that needs to take place. So that's one more thing states need to address, and possibly in some of these states they're going to need to go to their legislature and get laws changed, emergency laws put into place for the November election in particular. In fact, one of the things I'm really concerned about in those days following Election Day, as states start reporting, and if we have half the ballots that are still uncounted, how do you report that? And being, a West Coast state, we hate it when the East Coast states report on election night because it affects our voter turnout election night. But more to the point, as we're releasing results, we don't want people to say, oh, well, state X is just waiting to see how state Y does so they can swamp them with more illegal votes. And so there's really going to have to be a lot of transparency and education to the public of how we're doing this and why it's fair.
Well, I know you can't speak for other states, but just speaking for the state of Washington. So if you had a local election official, your county auditor, let's say in is it King County, Seattle is? If you had your local county auditor there, tabulate ballots before Election Day and then release those results, what would be the punishment?
Well, that would be a felony. And in our state, I believe it's up to a $10,000 fine or more, and it's 5 years in prison. That's for voter fraud. So to do that, you caught me off guard. I can't remember what the penalty is here, but it definitely is a felony. And I can tell you, I've lived through that. We had that governor's race, I can tell you, was not a pleasant experience. King County was right in the middle, in the epicenter of it, and the election director now is an elected position as a result, because it was an appointed position by the county executive, and now it's elected. So now that position actually answers to their voters directly, and the election director, it's a different environment, and it's a really good positive one. And in fact, King County, since that election now has lean principles that they apply to a 6 Sigma level of accuracy. They account for every single ballot that's in their charge and report that, and are very transparent. They built a facility so people can observe. So they've really upped their game, and King County Elections has is really one of the leading counties in the country in terms of the way that they conduct elections, and that's really what the gold standard. That's what we all need to aspire to.
Well, that's great to hear. It's great to see that you've addressed some of the issues, and that's what we like to see. And really, that's the responsiveness that a state and local election process can give you, than a top-down approach from the federal government. But I do want to reiterate, if somebody tabulated ballots as an election official and released those tabulations before Election Day, you could effectively, as you said earlier, really impact the get out the vote efforts of other candidates or each candidate. But it would be a felony if they were caught doing that, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And if it isn't, for some reason, I can't imagine why it wouldn't be, but if it isn't, it needs to be. And so you talk about something at a federal level that might be considered, that might be it. You definitely want to make sure that there are high penalties for those people who are entrusted and are seeing the election process from the inside. We're actually looking at ballots before Election Day, but in no way, shape, or form are we releasing results.
Yeah, and there should be some major punishment for that to happen. Well, I don't know. It's ironic. I don't know if you'd be surprised, but one of our county clerks in my district released election results during the presidential primary before Election Day. And the penalties aren't nearly as strong here in the state of Illinois. So that's interesting to know. that there are stronger penalties in other states. Thank you for addressing that. I just want to say thank you. You've been a great guest. I usually our Q&As will not last nearly this long. It's so interesting to me, and I don't think enough people in politics or in policy making positions take election processes as serious as they should. And that's why I'm glad we had you here. I really am. One last question for you. So elections are held during the NFL season. Mm-hmm. So you noticed that there is a higher turnout or a lower turnout of people coming to help you tabulate the ballots on election day if a home game in Seattle was played Sunday before the election day on Tuesday? Because you guys at that stadium, I've never seen fans work so hard during a game to be so loud, and they got to be worn out for at least a couple of days after that.
Oh, they are. We actually do use it as voter outreach. I know that King County Elections does go out in front of CenturyLink. Oops, it's not CenturyLink anymore. Anyway, in front of Seahawks Stadium, and do get out the vote efforts and mostly register people to vote. But we take our football pretty seriously here in Seattle. In fact, I have to share with you, because since I don't have any kind of Seahawks paraphernalia behind me, the highlight of my first term in office was the year we won the Super Bowl, and we had an event here to raise money for charity, and we had the Lombardi Trophy in my office right on the other side of the screen, and people paid money, and we had a beer garden and bratwurst and things, and it was for charity, and people got their picture taken with the Lombardi Trophy. Best day in the office, hands down.
The Seahawks win a Super Bowl again. I hope they don't beat my Raiders, since they can now play each other in the Super Bowl. I certainly hope that I get an invitation to see that in action.
Absolutely. Well, we'll have to, as a season, hopefully we will have a season, but, we may have to have some friendly wagers here. I don't know. We'll have to take this offline sometime.
Gladly do that. Hey, Madam Secretary, do you have anything else you wanted to add for our viewers before we ended this broadcast?
Just one. Thank you so much, Representative Davis, for having me on today and just having this conversation. I think that right now, arguably, we can all maybe one thing we can all agree on is that this election is the most anticipated election in a century, certainly in our lifetimes, at least one of the most. And right now, neither side believes they can lose. And I know in Washington, D.C., that it is a very hyper-partisan environment, and it's the nature of Congress, and that's a good, healthy thing for American democracy. But right now, neither side believes they're going to lose. And I guarantee you, at some point in November, somebody is going to lose. And our job in this country as election administrators is to convince the losers that it was a fair election and it was accurate. And all the vitriol that's happening on social media, all of the, quite frankly, misinformation and disinformation is designed to undermine our confidence, public confidence. And so we need to get past our partisanship right now, figure out a way to work together to make sure that people don't have to choose between their health and their exercising a constitutionally protected right. We make sure that everybody gets to participate who's eligible, and that the election is fair to everyone concerned. And as Americans, we need to do that and work together to make it happen. So thank you for doing this, and thank you for the work you're doing in this space and that your committee does, because it couldn't be more important.
Well said, Madam Secretary. And again, thank you to Washington's Secretary of State, my good friend Kim Wyman, for joining us on Q&A with Rodney. This is a broadcast from the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on House Administration, Republicans. And I appreciate your time today, Madam Secretary. Thanks again. I look forward to seeing you, hopefully in that beer garden, if the Seahawks happen to win and my Raiders.
There you go. Well, we'll see, but go Hawks.
Thank you.